In the modern world, we often view toxic dynamics as psychological puzzles to be solved or emotional battles to be won. We spend sleepless nights dissecting a partner's cutting remarks or a family member's manipulative patterns, hoping that if we find the right combination of words, they will finally change. But the ancient Stoics, men like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, would offer us a sobering yet liberating reality check. You are wasting the only currency that truly matters, your time and your tranquility. Navigating a toxic relationship isn't about fixing a broken person. It is about fortifying a broken boundary. Stoicism teaches us that while we cannot control the storms of another person's character, we are the absolute captains of our own soul's ship. The toxicity of others only becomes our own poison when we allow it to breach our inner citadel. This guide is not about changing them. It is about reclaiming the power you have inadvertently handed over to someone who does not have your best interest at heart. We will explore how to apply the dichotomy of control to your social circle, ensuring that your happiness is no longer a hostage to someone else's dysfunction. Join our journey. If you are ready to stop being a victim of circumstance and start becoming a master of your own mind, subscribe to our community. We provide the philosophical tools you need to build a life of resilience, virtue, and unshakable peace in an often chaotic world. The true challenge of a toxic relationship is rarely the external behavior of the other person, though that behavior may be egregious, manipulative, or even cruel. From a Stoic perspective, the external world is a whirlwind of indifference. Things that, while perhaps unpleasant, do not have the inherent power to destroy your character or your happiness. The real crisis is the internal chaos that follows. It is the silent, corrosive theft of your ataraxia, the state of robust, unshakable tranquility that is the hallmark of the Stoic sage. When we find ourselves entangled with a toxic individual, we fall into a cognitive trap that is as ancient as it is devastating. We begin to operate under the subconscious mantra, "If they would just change, I could finally be happy." This single thought is the ultimate surrender. The moment you make your mental well-being contingent on the moral evolution of another person, you have effectively handed them the keys to your mental fortress. You have taken the crown of your own self-sovereignty and placed it on the head of someone who has already proven they lack the wisdom to rule even themselves. The anatomy of emotional enslavement. The philosopher-slave Epictetus, who understood the nature of freedom better than perhaps any man in history, delivered a stinging warning. Any person capable of angering you becomes your master. He can disturb you only when you allow yourself to be disturbed by him. In a toxic relationship, this mastery is exercised daily. When we are tethered to a toxic individual, we are not merely dealing with a difficult person. We are living in a state of emotional enslavement. We become reactive barometers, rising and falling based on the atmospheric pressure of another person's dysfunction. If they are moody, we walk on eggshells. If they are insulting, we spend hours in internal litigation, crafting the perfect defense to a jury that isn't listening. If they are inconsistent, we lose our footing, desperately trying to find a stable patch of ground in a swamp of their making. This enslavement is a form of prohairesis, moral will, gone wrong. The Stoics believe that the only thing that truly belongs to us is our ability to choose our judgments and our actions. Everything else, reputation, health, and the behavior of others, belongs to the world. When we allow a toxic person to dictate our internal state, we are committing an act of self-betrayal. We are allowing an external indifferent to invade the sacred space of our reason. The illusion of the fix. The theft of tranquility is often a slow process. It begins with the belief that we can exert control over the other person's character. We believe that if we are kinder, if we are clearer, if we explain our hurt just one more time in a slightly different way, the toxic person will have an epiphany. We treat their character as a project to be managed rather than a reality to be accepted. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, reminded himself every morning, "The people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. I cannot be harmed by any of them, for no one can involve me in ugliness." The problem is that we allow ourselves to be involved in the ugliness. We mistake our empathy for a mandate to suffer alongside someone else's vice. We think that by being miserable, we are somehow helping them or proving our loyalty. In reality, we are simply doubling the amount of misery in the world. By focusing on fixing them, we neglect the only thing we actually have the power to fix, our own response. the cost of the tether. The cost of this theft is higher than we realize. It isn't just a few bad days or a bit of stress. It is the systematic dismantling of your ability to live a virtuous life. Dissipation of focus. Instead of focusing on your own purpose, your energy is bled dry by the drama of the day. Loss of integrity. In response to their toxicity, you may find yourself acting out of character, becoming defensive, manipulative, or angry. You lose your own virtue in a vain attempt to counter their vice. Psychological exhaustion. The mental fortress becomes a prison when the walls are built out of fear rather than reason. To a Stoic, a toxic relationship is a laboratory for the soul. The challenge is not to change the other person, but to reach a point where their behavior has as much impact on your internal peace as the weather. A storm may delay your travel, but it does not have to make you a hateful person. A toxic person may shout, but they cannot force you to lose your composure unless you agree to the terms of their conflict. The breakthrough, reclaiming the keys. To stop the theft of tranquility, one must first accept a hard, cold truth. The toxic person may never change. In fact, for the sake of your own sanity, you must assume they won't. The problem is solved not when the other person becomes kind, but when you become indifferent to their unkindness. This isn't a cold or callous indifference. It is a protective, philosophical indifference. It is the realization that their insults are merely vibrations in the air, and their moods are passing clouds that have nothing to do with the core of who you are. Until you reclaim the keys to your fortress, you are a passenger in your own life. You're waiting for permission to be at peace. The Stoic path demands that you stop waiting. It demands that you recognize that while they may have the power to act poorly, they only have the power to make you miserable if you remain tethered to the outcome of their actions. The theft ends the moment you decide that your tranquility is non-negotiable. To navigate the minefield of a toxic relationship, one cannot rely on mere willpower or positive thinking. These are flimsy shields that shatter the moment a toxic person presses your buttons. Instead, we require a systematic overhaul of our cognitive architecture. The Stoic toolkit is not a collection of pithy quotes. It is a rigorous set of psychological exercises designed to build an inner citadel, a place of retreat that the world cannot touch. 1. The dichotomy of control, the ultimate filter. The cornerstone of the Stoic toolkit is the dichotomy of control. Epictetus opens his Enchiridion with the most vital distinction a human can make. Some things are up to us, and some things are not up to us. In a toxic relationship, we suffer because we have blurred this line. We believe that if we explain our feelings clearly enough, the other person's empathy will kick in. Up to us? No. We believe that if we behave perfectly, they will stop criticizing us. Up to us? No. The Stoic exercise here is to ruthlessly categorize every element of your relationship. Outside your control, their opinions, their moods, their past, their words, their lack of growth. Within your control, your judgments, your boundaries, your own integrity, and your decision to stay or leave. When you stop trying to manage things in the first category, you stop leaking energy. You move from being a frustrated architect trying to rebuild a crumbling wall to a wise traveller who simply walks around it. 2. Premeditatio malorum, the shield of expectation. Most of our pain in toxic dynamics comes from surprise. We are shocked when the narcissist is selfish. We are devastated when the manipulator lies. This surprise is a failure of preparation. The Stoic practice of premeditatio malorum, premeditation of evils, involves mentally rehearsing the difficult interactions before they happen. Before you walk into the house or answer that phone call, tell yourself, the person I am about to speak with will likely be ungrateful, aggressive, or irrational. I expect this. Because I expect it, it cannot catch me off guard. Because it cannot catch me off guard, it cannot pierce my peace. By removing the shock value of their behavior, you strip them of their power. You're no longer a victim of their spontaneity. You're a witness to their predictable nature. You don't get angry at a dog for barking. Why get angry at a toxic person for acting toxic? 3. Cognitive distancing. It is nothing to me. Stoics were the original cognitive behavioral therapists. They understood that it isn't the event that harms us, but our interpretation of the event. If someone calls you a worthless failure, those are merely sound waves moving through the air. They only become harmful when your mind translates them into a personal tragedy. The toolkit item here is reframing. When an insult is hurled your way, practice seeing it as a clinical observation rather than a personal attack. Think, this person is experiencing a flare-up of their own internal chaos. Their words are a symptom of their disease, not a diagnosis of my worth. Marcus Aurelius suggested imagining the person as a child, not to be condescending, but to realize that their outbursts often come from a place of undeveloped emotional maturity. You wouldn't be offended if a toddler called you poopy head. Apply that same distance to the toxic adult. 4. The view from above. Expanding the perspective. Toxic relationships have a way of shrinking our world. We become hyper-focused on the last text message or the morning's argument until that conflict becomes our entire universe. The view from above is a meditative exercise where you mentally zoom out. Imagine yourself from the ceiling, then from the roof, then from the clouds, and finally from the stars. See yourself as one of billions of humans who have dealt with difficult people since the dawn of time. From this height, the emergency of the relationship loses its intensity. You see the toxic person as a tiny, temporary speck in a vast cosmos. This isn't meant to make your life feel insignificant, but to make your problems feel manageable. It reminds you that this too shall pass. The toxic person is not a god, and their drama is not the focal point of human history. 5. Sympathia. Recognizing the common thread. This is perhaps the most difficult tool to master. Sympathia is the recognition that we're all part of a larger whole, and that people act out of ignorance rather than pure, conscious evil. The Stoic believes that no one wakes up and says, "I want to be a miserable, toxic person today." Instead, they act out of a closeness of vision. They believe their behavior is the only way to get what they want or to protect themselves. They are wrongly judging what is good for them. When you use the tool of sympathia, you replace anger with a form of pity. You realize that while you have to deal with their toxicity for an hour, they have to live with themselves 24/7. Their mind is a turbulent, unhappy place. This doesn't mean you let them walk all over you, but it allows you to set boundaries without the burning poison of resentment. Resentment is a heavy burden to carry. Pity is light. 6. Contemplation of the sage. The moral North Star. When you're in the thick of an argument, your lizard brain wants to fight or flee. To counter this, call upon the contemplation of the sage. Ask yourself, how would the person I most admire handle this? How would a person of perfect character respond to this insult? This provides an immediate objective standard. It moves the goalpost from winning the argument to maintaining my character. If you yell back, they have won, because they have forced you to abandon your virtue. If you remain calm, firm, and rational, you have won, regardless of what they say, because you remained the master of yourself. The practice of philosophy. These tools are not one-and-done solutions, they are muscles. The first time you try to remain indifferent to a toxic jab, you might fail. Your heart will race, and your face will flush. That is okay. The Stoic path is one of progress, prokope, not perfection. The goal of the Stoic toolkit is to create a gap between the stimulus, their toxic behavior, and your response, your internal state. In that gap lies your freedom. By practicing these exercises, you stop being a puppet dancing to the rhythm of someone else's dysfunction, and start being the architect of your own tranquility. In the grand narrative of a toxic relationship, we often wait for a cinematic climax. We envision a final, explosive argument where we deliver a monologue so profound and cutting that the other person falls to their knees in a state of sudden, miraculous realization. We wait for the moment they finally get it, apologize for years of manipulation, and transform into the person we've always wanted them to be. But in Stoicism, the climax is not an external explosion. It is a quiet, internal revolution. It is the moment of radical choice. This is the instant you realize that you have been an unwitting accomplice to your own unhappiness by remaining reactive to a script you didn't write, the realization of complicity. This is a hard truth to swallow, and it is the pivot point of the entire Stoic journey. To be an accomplice does not mean you're at fault for the other person's toxicity. Their vice is their own. However, you become an accomplice to your own suffering when you continue to offer your peace as a sacrifice on the altar of their dysfunction. Every time you react to a jab with an hour-long defense, you are collaborating with the toxin. Every time you lose sleep wondering why they would do this, you're handing them the steering wheel of your mind. The climax occurs when you stop asking, "Why are they like this?" and start asking, "Why am I still allowing this to matter?" This shift is radical because it moves the focus from the problem, the other person, to the solution, your own agency. It is the moment you accept that the person may never change, may never apologize, and may never see the world through your lens of justice, and you decide that you are going to be okay anyway. The death of the explanation. A key indicator that you have reached this climax is the sudden, profound cessation of the need to explain yourself. In a toxic dynamic, explaining is often just a disguised form of begging. We explain our boundaries, our feelings, and our logic in a desperate attempt to gain validation from someone who is psychologically or characterologically incapable of giving it. The Stoic climax is the moment you realize that you're explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. When this realization hits, something beautiful happens. Silence. Not a cold, passive-aggressive silence, but a sovereign silence. You realize that your truth does not require their acknowledgement to be true. Your value does not require their check mark of approval to be valid. You stop the internal litigation, that mental courtroom where you argue your case to a ghost of the person in your head. You simply stop the trial, you settle the case in your own favor, and walk out of the courtroom. Eudaimonia versus hope. The climax is the moment you choose eudaimonia, true flourishing well-being over hope. In the context of a toxic relationship, hope is often a poison. It is the hope that next time will be different that keeps us stuck in the cycle of disappointment. Stoic. Hope is not a passive wish for things to change. It is a confident trust in one's own character. The radical choice is deciding that your soul's tranquility is worth more than the slim 1% chance that the toxic person will wake up tomorrow with a new personality. You choose the certainty of your own virtue over the uncertainty of their redemption. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It is a shame for the soul to be first to give way in this life, when the body does not give way. To give way is to surrender your hegemonikon, your inner ruling faculty, to the whims of a confused and irrational person. The climax is the moment you take that faculty back. Setting the boundary, the shield, not the sword. In this moment of radical choice, the nature of your boundaries changes fundamentally. Most people set boundaries as a way to control others. If you do X, I will do Y. They hope the threat of the boundary will force the other person to behave. This is still a form of external control, and it usually fails. The Stoic boundary is different. It is not a sword used to change the other person, it is a shield used to protect the self. The old way. I'm setting this boundary so you'll stop yelling at me. Focus. Them. The Stoic way. I do not remain in the presence of yelling. If yelling begins, I will leave the room to preserve my own composure. Focus. You. The climax is when you stop caring how they react to the boundary. Whether they mock the boundary, get angry at it, or ignore it becomes indifferent to you. Your job is simply to execute your own virtuous action. You're no longer a participant in their drama, you are a guardian of your own peace. The quiet power of no. There is a profound climax in the word no. Not a shouted no, but a calm, resolute no to the invitations to chaos. No, I will not participate in this argument. No, I will not take responsibility for your emotional state. No, I will not sacrifice my values to keep the peace. This is the moment of peak tension. The toxic person will likely escalate. They will try every old trick, guilt, gaslighting, anger, to get you back into your role as a reactive accomplice. The climax is reached when you feel that tug on your emotions and for the first time, you don't move. You feel the hook, but you don't bite. You see the storm, but you don't let it inside. Conclusion of the moment. This radical choice is the highest expression of human freedom. It is the realization that while you may be in a prison of circumstances, your mind is a sovereign territory. The climax of your story is not when the villain is defeated, but when the villain no longer has the power to affect the hero. You have moved from being a victim of a toxic relationship to being a student of a difficult one. You have traded the exhausting labor of trying to change others for the rewarding labor of mastering yourself. You are finally, truly free. Stoicism is frequently misunderstood as a philosophy of passive endurance, a grim gritting of the teeth, while life tramples over you. In reality, it is a philosophy of radical liberation. It teaches us that while we may lose our property, our reputation, or our comfort, our character, our prohairesis, is our only true and indestructible possession. To navigate a toxic relationship is to engage in the ultimate act of reclaiming that self from the hands of those who would diminish it. Reclaiming yourself requires a threefold path of clarity and action. 1. Acknowledge nature. Accept the reality of the person before you. If a person is habitually manipulative or cruel, stop being surprised by it. Acknowledge that they are acting according to their nature and their current level of understanding. You cannot be angry at a fire for burning. You simply decide how close to stand to the flames. 2. Withdraw. Investment. Strip the other person of the power to validate you. When you withdraw your emotional investment from their approval, their insults become mere noise, and their praise becomes empty air. Your self-worth is moved back inside your own walls. 3. Act with virtue. Stoic courage often manifests as the strength to walk away. Acting with justice means being fair to yourself as well as others. If a connection requires you to sacrifice your integrity or peace, the most virtuous act is to limit contact or exit entirely to preserve the sanctity of your soul. Philosophy is a practice, not a theory. Today, identify one recurring trigger in your relationship. Instead of falling into the old trap of defense or anger, apply premeditatio malorum. Mentally rehearse the conflict before it happens. Expect the insult, anticipate the manipulation, and decide, right now, that it will not move you. When it occurs, remain indifferent. Watch the storm pass while you stay anchored in your own virtue. Your peace is a choice, not a reaction. Like this video if it helped you gain a new perspective on your boundaries. Subscribe to join our community of modern Stoics and never miss a guide to mental freedom. Comment below with one Stoic principle you're using to stay grounded this week. I'll see you in the next one. Stay resilient.